Welcome to Chapter 20. Today we're going to be talking about corporate identities and visual systems. So we've been talking a lot about design movements, and we're going to kind of open it up during this time and really talk about a broader time period. We're going to be talking about just about the 1950s, a little bit before, almost to the 1970s, about what was happening really within the world of design. As we talked in one of the last lectures, design was really only put into universities, kind of became a profession in the mid 1950s, 60s. And so we're going to talk about the time that it's really getting picked up and the things that started to change in the marketing world, in the corporation world, that responded to what was happening in design. So we're going to be talking about corporate identities and visual systems. During World War II, which is the period that we're going to start out kind of moving out of right after World War II, there were huge technological advances. With this kind of bright view of the future, design picked up a new slogan in the 1950s. Designers would say, good design is good business. You'll need to know that for your quiz. So good design is good business. What that meant is that design was now important. Having good design meant that your business would be successful. And people were starting to pick up on this idea that to have a successful business, you need to have good design. Design really started to become a major way that was seen to shape the reputation of a company and really manage expectations and show the quality and reliability of a company through their design, not necessarily through a spokesperson saying something or try our product and you'll know for yourself. Really, they wanted to communicate that visually through design. So the first designer that we're going to talk about in this period is a man by the name of George Olden. George Olden. So in 1945, George Olden was hired to establish a graphic design department to design visuals that would go on air, on broadcast at CBS. He was put in this position because he had an extremely well-known design background. He really was one of the forefathers of this idea of a corporate identity. Now, when we say corporate identity, we're not just talking about a logo. A corporate identity is really a comprehensive visual system that represents a company the way that they want to be represented. So think about Adult Swim, for example. Adult Swim wants to be on the edge. They want to be slightly offensive, slightly nonchalant. They want you to think that they don't really care, to kind of have that slacker attitude. So their corporate identity is not just the Adult Swim logo, but you'll see the bumpers in between that have the black screen with the white text. A lot of their ads are branded to their corporate identity. It's a visual representation of what the company would look like in a visual and what they're trying to communicate visually. So at this time when George Olden was hired, the medium of TV was new. And working in television, it was really, really hard and almost incapable of differentiating between subtle colors and tonal contrasts. A lot because it wasn't black and white, but I had a hard time differentiating between those contrasts. Especially during this time, a lot of television sets would be at different sizes, and so they would crop out different parts of the signal. Much like today, not so much today, but maybe 10 years ago when we were switching over from tube TVs to HD and to plasma, the aspect ratio started to change. You don't see square TVs anymore. All the TVs are in 16:9 or more rectangle shape. So it would cut off part of the broadcast, depending on what TV you were looking at. So the problem was this, that the spots would only air on television for a couple seconds, and they really needed instant comprehension. So he would have to design these on-air graphics for instant comprehension in a very short amount of time for a whole bunch of different size screens without being able to show subtle tonal contrast. So that's a lot of creative problems. And as we say, creative problems call for creative solutions. And his creative solution was this, that he would design it so that it had very harsh and stark contrast, and he would design the image from the center out. That way, any size television screen would be able to show the center, but it could still cut off what was happening on the outside because that was just extra information. So this is the logo and the first real spot that he came up with. Oops, sorry, there we go. So this is one of the first spots that was aired on the network. Tonal contrast designed from the center out. So the USPS commissioned Olden to design a postage stamp for the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. So this made him the first African-American designer to design a postage stamp. This was the postage stamp that he worked on, this is the postage stamp that he worked on that really commemorated the 100-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, and made him the first African-American designer to design a postage stamp. So next we're going to talk about the CBS logo. Now, the CBS president, Frank Stanton, really understood what design was all about. This is another one of, if not possibly the most recognizable corporate identities. So CBS in New York started to move to the forefront of corporate identity design because of two things. One was that the president, Frank Stanton, really understood art and design and its potential to give an image to a company and really help in corporate affairs. The second was William Golden. William Golden was the CBS art director for nearly 20 years. And this is going to be on your quiz. Golden designed one of the most successful trademarks of the 20th century for CBS. He designed kind of that I trademark. The logo first appeared on air on November 16th, 1951. And it was superimposed over a cloud-filled sky. Like we said, designing from the center out. So this is the very first one. So designed by William Golden, one of the most recognizable, still to today, corporate identities. And it was superimposed so that it has this bright tonal contrast as well as being designed from the center out. So the logo immediately upon reception was thought to be too boring and too simple. But they stuck with it and kept going. And William Golden has this great quote. He said this: "Just when you're beginning to get bored with what you've done is probably the time that your audience is beginning to notice it." So they've been working on this logo over and over and over, as I'm sure you guys do in classes. You're working on a logo, working on a sketch, working on an idea. You see it 100 million times, and you get so sick of it that you think, okay, it's boring, it's stupid, let's kick it out. But just as you start to get bored with it is just when your audience is starting to pick up on it. Even though you're bored with it, someone else might think, huh, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And even though you've been looking at it for 20 days, it could be awesome while you still think that it's boring because you've been seeing it so often. So because of the CBS logo, a corporate philosophy and approach to design and advertising emerged in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Golden is responsible for coining the word design as a verb. He would say that in the sense that we design something to be communicated to someone. That yes, there was a designer, but he coined it as a verb, that something is designed, that I will design, an action verb, this to communicate to you. So the CBS approach to corporate identity and design was not dependent on a real system or a style, but more so on the management policy toward the design and creative abilities of its design personnel. If you've ever heard of a graphic standard manual, that's something that really manages a corporate identity. There are certain ways you can use a logo, certain colors you can use, certain fonts you can use to really represent that corporation as if it were a person. So when you look at the work or the design that is coming from that corporation, you almost imagine a person of how they would say it to you, what that person would look like, and whether or not you trust that company. The next designer we're going to talk about during this time was Mr. Raymond Loewy. And this is actually a Google Doodle that was created inspired by his designs. I think it was featured last year. But Raymond Loewy is extremely influential and very well recognized And he's recognized because of his different mind. He really saw the significance of comprehensive design systems, and he really left a huge mark on America, especially in the sense of the history of visual styling. So Lowy specialized in design for locomotive and automotive industries, so transportation. His big thing was that he loved working with speed and innovation. He thought that speed and innovation really defined success. He would reimagine how trains and planes and buses and cars would look and how they would perform to kind of enter into this imaginative kind of zone to create this new look for what the future could look like. Raymond Lowy was a great artist and really held true to that idea that we talk about so much of really looking into the past, processing it through the present, and creating a future. He did this to the point to where he created a future that was so ahead of its time that people thought that it was almost science fiction. He would design for huge companies. He worked with BP, he worked with Shell, he worked with Exxon, Nabisco, US Mail, Studebaker, Lucky Strike, Canada Dry, and TWA are some of his kind of big name clients. But what's really notable about Raymond Lowy is that he didn't just do logos. Like we said, corporate identity is not the logo. He would do complete corporate identities designs. One of his most notable is when he started doing work for the New York Railroad, they hired him to redesign one of their locomotives. So he designed the logo for the railroad, but he also redesigned the actual look of the locomotives themselves, the trains themselves. Then he redesigned all of the interiors of the trains. Then he redesigned all of the menus that were happening in the dining carts. And then he redesigned all of the matchbooks that would be given out in the rooms. So he would give a complete and comprehensive corporate identity to the clients that he worked with. This is a great example of a Raymond Lowy, how a Raymond Lowy steamliner looks. On the left is kind of a regular steamliner. On the right, you see this really futuristic, edgy, really different looking train. And that was because Raymond Lowy was thinking ahead of his time to think, okay, I'm not only going to brand this railroad, I'm going to brand what the train looks like, what the menus look like, and really set it apart so that this specific rail line has a corporate identity. And at the bottom, you'll see some of his logos that are still being used today. The BP, Shell, Exxon were all things that were used by him in his kind of pursuit to seek corporate identities. And this is the Lucky Strike logo and packaging that he designed as well. Next, we're going to talk about the New Haven Rail, which has one of the best and one of my favorite corporate identities of really anywhere. So Patrick McGinnis was the president of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. And he really wanted to launch a new corporate design program. What's interesting is that the railroad itself was in the midst of technological updating. They had new engines, new cars, new signal systems were being put in. And so McGinnis thought that a new contemporary logo and design program and corporate identity would fully enable him to really create a new modern and progressive image for his railroad. Now, the person that was hired to design this corporate identity was Herbert Matter. Herbert Matter. He was commissioned to design this new trademark for the railroad. And this is the trademark that he came up with. This is the look and real corporate identity for the New Haven Railroad. A very, very bold look, bright colors, very much in motion, showing that giant slab serif of the NH, really pushing this to have something that is alphabetic, but still mathematical and balanced with bright pops of color, so that if you saw this train, you would know immediately, because of the corporate identity, this is a New Haven Railway train, not something that is happening on another rail line. And this is the mark that he came up with. Very, very heavy, adapted. He wanted to kind of look like railroad equipment in a modern, futuristic look. Also during the 1960s, there was a huge explosion in growth in the use of the international typographic style. We've talked about this in the past. International typographic style is very, very clean, very modern, a lot of black and white. It has that jagged right edge that Jan Schickoltz made so famous. And a lot of corporations started to move into a visual identity that was working within the international typographic style. They would design very, very highly systematic design programs to create complex and diverse parts into a unified whole. So they wanted all of their company, every single little piece, to be part of a larger whole that visually looked like it all came from the same place. Disney does a great job at doing this with their environments, with pretty much everything, especially within their lands. They say that no matter where you're standing in the park, you should be able to do 360 degrees and not have anything that contradicts itself. So basically what that means that when you're in Toontown, Toontown has a corporate identity. It is fun, it's goofy, and no matter where you look, that corporate identity holds true. The bright colors, the squiggly lines, the signage is goofy, the type that they use is different, the way that the walkways navigate through that part of the park are very conducive to children. And so every part of that would be included in a corporate identity. So in the 1960s, the international typographic style, this kind of clean look, was extremely popular. In 1962, Lufthansa, which is a German airline, commissioned a new identification system to be designed. They took a huge, huge influence from the international typographic style and started working on a grid system that had extremely detailed specifications. Now, these specifications were for logo placement, for type usage, for how the logo and type would go together. Every little piece was put onto a grid and made absolutely perfect and mathematical. Now, this would carry over to things like the food. This would carry over to the timetables that you would show in the airports. This also carried over to even the aircraft identification. Every part of Lufthansa's corporate identity was cohesive and based in the international typographic style. Now, this system really became the standard for identity systems because every detail was so perfectly uniform. Lufthansa was known as kind of having the holy grail of corporate identities, and everyone wanted to replicate the precision that they had in their corporate identity. And again, some more of logo placement, type placement, everything was very specific, set up on a very specific grid. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about transportation. So there were a lot of major international events happening at the time, so larger airports were happening. Because of this, they needed a visual way to communicate some complex ideas to people that didn't necessarily speak the language of the airport that they were in. So it was commissioned to create a system of really corporate identities, but more so a visual system of communication to show how to do things or where certain things were that would be universally understood. So it was basically they were trying to make new symbols. Even though some of these symbols contained pictograms of what the things actually were, they wanted to create new symbols that were understood out of any context or any language so that travelers would be able to navigate airports. So in 1974, the nation's oldest professional graphic design organization, the American Institute of Graphic Arts, AIGA, you'll hear about them, was commissioned to create a master set of 34 passenger and pedestrian symbols. So the final set of symbols was designed by these two men, Roger Cook and Don Shinaski, and their names are up there. You won't need to know that for your quiz, but here are the symbols that they used and created. So if we look at these, some of them are pictograms, like the luggage, the cigarette, the phone. They're things that we understand, cool, this is a phone. I probably use the phone to call someone. But then they kind of started to use and invent other symbols. Like we see the first aid there would be understood out of any context or any place, any language. Cool, that is first aid, that's where I need to go if I need help. Something like the elevator that's happening in the second row. It is using the indices of the arrows with pictograms of the people in a box, which is a symbol for an elevator, to create this new symbol and visual communication that it's an elevator. There's a box with people in it, and the indices are saying that it's going up and down. So that's elevators. So they created this universally understood series of symbols so that people could better navigate airports as they traveled. Next, I want my MTV. So, music television, or MTV, first went on air in 1981. And you'd think that they wouldn't be that huge of a deal, or you think about MTV now and it's not that big of a deal, or that influential. MTV was huge for the world of design. So the MTV logo is one of the most recognizable logos in the world. The MTV logo was designed by Pat Gorman, Frank Alinsky, and Patty Rogoff. You'll need to know those names for your quiz. Pat Gorman, Frank Alinsky, and Patty Rogoff. So how it was made is they created this awesome M that you'll see in the MTV logo. This is great M, it's bold, kind of dimensional, but they thought that this M needed some more character. So he literally took a pen, scratched a TV over it, and that's the logo that you see today. It wasn't really well thought out or planned that way. They thought it needed more character, so they kind of threw character at it by just scratching a TV on top of that great M that they had, and created this iconic, universally recognized logo. So they started to create and play around with the logo to have a lot of different textures and treatments and shapes and colors and animations. And their concept and approach to logo design changed the world of design forever. So the concept of a logo with a constantly changing persona ran completely contrary to all ideas of corporate identity that were happening at the time. People thought that trademarks and visual identifiers should be absolutely fixed and never be changed and used in a very consistent manner. MTV, being the rebels that they are, wanted to really fight against that system and see what they could do to push corporate identity into a new world. They really changed the phase and speed of graphic design and really started to set the tone for the world of motion graphics in the future. By 1995, MTV was the second most recognized logo in the world, right behind Coca-Cola. So what's so influential about MTV is, like I said, this was the MTV logo, and even though this is a great MTV logo, they would play around with how they displayed it. It wasn't just about having this logo. Again, corporate identity is not a logo. Corporate identity is what you do with that. And so they'd start playing around with building it in real life. And then they would put different textures and animations inside of it. Then they'd break it apart and completely destroy it. And they came up with this real no rules for their corporate identity. Yes, this was their logo, but their corporate identity was the chaos and rebellious spirit that MTV really held true to. So MTV recently went through a rebrand. This is the new MTV logo. Again, it's not about the logo, it's about how they use it. And so how they are using it is they are putting a lot of the shows that are airing, which all these shows here are canceled now, all the shows that are airing inside of this MTV, really using a mix of the international typographic style and a mix of kind of this modern rebellious spirit, and really putting things inside of that logo to showcase their corporate identity. So moving on, in the 1950s and 60s, while World War II left most industrial countries really devastated, excuse me, the manufacturing capacity of the U.S. really escaped undamaged. This time, the 1950s and 60s, was an era of unprecedented industrial expansion, where a lot of large corporations started playing an important role in developing marketing products and services, really. So during the 1950s and 60s, designers started to fully embrace this idea of corporate identity. They wanted to create a visual identification system and really make that a major design activity. Two of the most notable designers working in this new zone were, we talked about them before, Paul Rand and Saul Bass. They flourished and really became extremely notable and famous in this new idea of creating visual identity systems for companies. One of the best examples of visual identity system that was created was by Paul Rand, and he created it for IBM, International Business Machines. The IBM design program wanted to express the extremely advanced and up-to-date nature of its products, but they weren't looking for a theme. They were looking for a consistent design quality that would kind of become a theme. So they hired Paul Rand to really create a logo for them, create this visual identity. He also is responsible for creating visual identities for ABC even, and some larger companies at that. So this is some of the work that he did for IBM. He was working and really wanted to show that this corporate identity is not about the logo. Any one of these could be the logo, but he said it's about how that logo is implied, how that logo is used. He would use it in stripes, use it in different ways to kind of show that there are many different ways that the logo could be used in this visual identity system. Again, here, he wanted to show different patterns, different colors, make it bold and different. And even though it doesn't all look the same, it has a complete visual identity system as it continues through. Some more work for IBM. And this is a piece that he created for IBM that eventually won a lot of awards, but was temporarily banned from being used in advertisements for IBM because they thought that it would encourage the staff members to take liberties with their logo. It's very playful, very much in the style of Paul Rand, showing that IBM corporate identity. Again, it's not about the logo, it's about having a visual system. And the ABC logo that we all know so well, extremely influenced by Herbert Bayer's alphabet that he created for the Bauhaus, like you see those round figures, only lowercase. And really, he wanted to reduce this logo to the most basic design that he could think of. So the final thing that we're going to talk about in this lecture is a pair of associates called Chermayeff and Geismar. I'm not going to try to spell those. It's on your screen, so you can write it down in your notes. Chermayeff and Geismar moved to the forefront of corporate identity in the 1960s. And they did this by creating a comprehensive visual language for Chase Manhattan Bank of New York. This is a logo that you've probably seen. One of their most successful designs after that, actually we'll talk about it in a second. So this is the Chase logo that they created, and it is still the logo that Chase uses today. They created a full visual identity system for Chase. And past that, they also did the corporate identity system for Mobile. Again, we were talking about a lot of designers working in the international typographic style during this time. Chermayeff and Geismar did the visual identity for Mobile, setting it in Helvetica, creating extremely simple sans serif, using it on that white, but adding some pops of color to really gain interest. So Chermayeff and Geismar aren't just known for these two logos. They're known for creating logos for over 100 corporate design programs and really creating visual identities for all of those companies. Here you'll see for Cinemark, NBC, Zondervan, Rockefeller Center, Time Warner, some of the more well-known marks and visual identity systems were created by Chermayeff and Geismar. And I lied about that being the last thing. We're actually going to talk about Saul Bass one more time. We spent a lot of time talking about him and how great he is and how awesome his signature is on things. So let's talk about him one more time and then we will leave him be. So Saul Bass, really we know him as a master of elemental forms. So his whole thing, again, simple image to create a strong idea, to really communicate visually this idea that he wanted to communicate. So obviously, he became extremely popular with iconic and widely used trademarks and visual systems. Bass believed that the trademark system, that a trademark must be really easily understood, but have every element of metaphor and ambiguity. So you should be able to look at it and understand, like, okay, I kind of get what it is, but also be a metaphor for something, also have a hidden image, also be visually interesting. So the idea with this is that it would attract the viewer again and again and again to keep looking at it. So you'll need to know this for your quiz, is that he designed trademarks for both Minolta, which you can see here, as well as AT&T, this logo here. And as you can see, as you know, Saul Bass is the king and forefather of title sequences. So he would often design these advertisements as well to go and create this real visual system for the company. Even though it's just their logo, it's showing tiny bits of information that are pulling together and wrapping around the world to bring information to the masses. So hopefully you enjoyed the lecture today and learned about corporate identities and visual systems. Thanks for watching.